Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Europe vows to stand firm in the face of President Trump's threats over Greenland, but does not give up on diplomacy. The US president and European leaders head to the annual Davos conference, from where we'll be joined by our correspondent Kazimierz Łysiak later on in the show. But before we get there, let's take a look at some of other top stories of today.
We need Greenland.
Trump's tariffs may prove ineffective against the EU. Vladimir Putin invited to Trump's Board of Peace initiative. And Poles gather nearly €1 million for Ukrainians experiencing severe energy shortage. It seems that the battle over Greenland will not be a military offensive, but an economic one. When Donald Trump warned of painful tariffs on his European allies, the bloc is ready to hit its transatlantic partner with a, quote, trade bazooka in response. What could this showdown of the giants come down to? Paweł Trzaskowski went looking for an answer.
We will not let ourselves be pressured. That was a promise made by Greenlandic Prime Minister today, as Greenland faces mounting pressure coming from Washington. The residents of this autonomous territory of Denmark wanted their sovereignty to be respected.
It's just my land. I grew up here and I can't just leave my country.
And Greenland is looking to Denmark and its European partners to fend off Trump's annexation threats. The Arctic endurance exercises that involved a few dozen NATO soldiers and a handful of aircraft, effectively a deterrent to US military intervention, have already ended.
This was all to make any American use of force against Greenland politically and diplomatically so much more costly.
Denmark is now sending additional troops and a general to the western part of Greenland, and although Trump does not rule out acquiring Greenland the hard way, some European capitals believe that US military intervention is unlikely for now.
Do you think Donald Trump is genuinely considering military action?
Look, I don't, actually.
But instead of military action, Trump is now threatening to slap tariffs on the countries that sent their soldiers to Greenland. Denmark says it will not respond alone. The European Union could deploy a countermeasure, the anti-coercion instrument, also known as a trade bazooka. Never used before, it would allow the bloc to impose severe restrictions on entities operating within the European Union. That could include, for example, US tech giants.
If we are confronted with tariffs that we consider unreasonable, we are in a position to respond.
Whether the EU will pull the trigger on this bazooka will be up for discussions at the bloc's emergency summit on Thursday. However, if the EU retaliates, a downward spiral of reciprocal moves could start, in which the US would have trump cards.
If Europe decides to respond with an escalation to a US escalation, so tariffs and then countermeasures from Europe,
it becomes a tit-for-tat situation.
Then Trump can escalate further, and I'm not entirely sure the Europeans have that much to respond then.
But the EU is not alone in its criticism of Trump's desire to acquire Greenland. His domestic opposition is also strong. A recent CBS poll found that 86% of Americans oppose taking Greenland by force, while 70% disapproved of using federal funds to buy the Danish territory. Also, US politicians from both sides of the aisle have lashed out at Trump's threats to slap tariffs on European NATO allies.
There is no current security threat from Russia or China to Greenland. The only security threat to Greenland right now is the United States.
And Russia, which was supposed to be one of the main threats to Greenland in Trump's rhetoric, seems actually quite happy about Washington's recent actions.
There are international experts who think that by solving the issue of Greenland's takeover, Trump will go down in history, both the history of the United States and world history.
And since a Nobel Peace Prize for Trump seems to be off the table now, the US president has told the Norwegian Prime Minister he is no longer obliged to think solely about peace.
Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant.
Given this, a conflict within NATO no longer seems like such a terrible idea in Washington. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
The feud between the U.S. and its allies over Greenland deepens day by day. To understand the mechanisms behind the economics of this brewing tariff war and what it would mean on both sides of the Atlantic, Maciej Wilowski brings us his next report.
We need Greenland.
U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening tariffs on key allies once again, this time over Greenland. On Saturday, Trump targeted 80 European countries that sent troops to Greenland with a 10% tariff starting February 1st, which could more than double to 25% in June. The targeted countries include EU members France, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and the Netherlands, along with non-EU member states Norway and the UK. But such a move by the Trump administration may prove ineffective, as the EU's internal free trade zone offers companies opportunities to bypass tariffs.
If you're going to take into account a big German car manufacturer, and which has companies registered in Poland, Hungary, then basically they can re-export the produce through Poland or Hungary.
Trump's tariffs also face uncertainty at home, where the Supreme Court could soon rule on their legality.
When this ruling is going to be not favorable to the White House, then the American government is going to find it more difficult for them to implement additional new tariffs.
If implemented, the latest tariffs could affect a wide range of products and industries, including an already beleaguered European auto sector. European stocks, which had enjoyed a record-setting run in recent months, tumbled on Monday on the news of more potential disruption to transatlantic trade.
And between the United States and Europe, well, we have, of course, a very large economic exchange. And that economic exchange is, at the aggregate level, highly advantageous to both sides. And the access to the U.S. market is very important also for Europe.
EU policymakers made their views on the tariffs clear.
As I think we both agree, we're living through uncharted territories. We've never seen this before. An ally, a friend of 250 years, is considering using tariffs. We don't like tariffs, but certainly we don't like using tariffs as a geopolitical weapon.
Retaliatory measures are already being prepped, including tariffs of up to 93 billion euros and deployment of the EU's so-called anti-coercion instrument, which could limit U.S. companies' access to the bloc's common market.
The European Union has tools at its disposal and is prepared to respond, because we will do everything necessary to protect EU economic interests.
What seemed like a brief period of calm in transatlantic trade relations could unravel again over Greenland. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
World leaders are looking on with caution as the list of invitees for Donald Trump's new initiative known as the Board of Peace is set to include the likes of Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko alongside Western officials, with Poland's Karol Nawrocki also receiving an invitation. The board is set to bring resolutions to global conflicts and, in theory, closely resembles the UN, with a small exception of a hefty fee of $1 billion after the end of a 3-year term. Our defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek has this report.
Will the Davos Forum see the ratification of a United Nations alternative?
It'll be one of the most legendary boards ever.
That appears to be what the US President Donald Trump will seek to obtain through his Board of Peace initiative for Gaza reconstruction. Though it's unclear who will sign the charter, some of the invitees have already been made public. Russia's Putin, Turkish President Erdogan and India's Prime Minister Modi are just a few amongst the prospective members. Some, including Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, bragged about it on social media.
Hungary's efforts for peace are being recognized. President Trump has invited Hungary to join the work of the Board of Peace as a founding member. We have, of course, accepted this honorable invitation.
And as was confirmed by the Polish MFA, Polish President Karol Nawrocki also received an invitation.
I can only confirm that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs acted as an intermediary in forwarding the invitation addressed to the President.
Though the Polish Prime Minister was quick to point out, any and all decisions on Warsaw's foreign policy direction are to be taken by the government.
Poland's accession to an international organization requires the consent of the cabinet and ratification by parliament. The government will be guided solely by the interests and security of the Polish state, and we will not allow anyone to outmaneuver us.
And while leaders themselves remain shy on the details, criticism already abounds. This includes UN Gaza rapporteur Francesca Albanese. And experts are not completely pro the idea, not least because of its speculated membership.
The Board of Peace for Gaza, following the last October ceasefire, the Board of Peace is predominantly a ceremonial, overarching body. And so it's Donald Trump, it's people like the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who's best known for the not-so-peaceful invasion of Iraq in 2003, people like Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, his real estate developer, Steve Witkoff, even leaders like Recep Erdogan, the president of Turkey. Already that Board of Peace is in trouble.
Members of the committee will receive a permanent seat if they pay $1 billion. Those who do not make the payment will only be able to stay on for 3 years. Prospective members insist that this money would have to be well spent.
Canada wants money to have maximum impact. Let me underscore one thing. Let me underscore one basic thing about the situation. We still do not have unimpeded aid flows, humanitarian aid flows at scale to the people of Gaza. That is a precondition for moving forward on this.
But while leaders are already engaging with Trump's idea as a viable possibility, experts warn that this is more than just a nod of a hat to Washington.
The real trouble is that he's really going ahead with changing the world order and undermining the unity of the West.
And others similarly warn that civic resistance may be the best way forward for maintaining multilateralism as it currently is.
There needs to be pushback where the media do their job, activists do their job, officials do their job, and say, stop giving us headlines for the spectacle of peace. Give us something which is reality, which we actually need for peace.
For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Where there was darkness, cold, and a potential humanitarian crisis unraveling, there's now a glimmer of hope. In just 4 days, Polish volunteers managed to raise nearly €1 million as part of the Warmth from Poland initiative, enabling the purchase and distribution of generators to those affected by power cuts in Ukraine. More on the ongoing fundraiser and the realities of a harsh winter amid war in Anastasia Yanchenko's report.
Scenes that look like something out of a disaster movie, but this is not fiction. This is reality for Ukraine. Sunday night brought record cold across the country, with temperatures dropping to -20°C. The inside of homes are freezing, in a grim reality now faced by hundreds of thousands. Many are choosing to stay in mobile shelters rather than return to their freezing homes.
We had no heating in the apartment for 4 full days, and everything froze very badly.
Last week, Russia launched over 1,300 drones and 1,000 missiles, mostly hitting energy infrastructure. Ukraine's president has warned that another major attack is coming as Russia seeks to disconnect nuclear power plants, in a move that would make the situation even worse.
Restoration work continues following Russian strikes. Unfortunately, there are new hits every night. Russia's main target remains unchanged, our energy sector.
Ukrainians left in the dark by Russia are being pulled out of the darkness by Poles. Through the Warmth from Poland campaign, volunteers have raised nearly €1 million in just 4 days, with major NGOs orchestrating the effort. And the campaign is still raising funds.
We couldn't sit and watch when in -17 degrees, people are, freezing over there.
We are collecting the money. We are connecting the people with goodwill, warm hearts of Polish society.
The initiative will deliver hundreds of energy generators to Kyiv and beyond, far more than organizers expected. The first shipment is scheduled to be dispatched later this week.
We thought at the beginning that this will be Kiev, but right now, because the scale of campaign and the engagement of normal Poles,
Ukraine's ambassador to Poland, Vasyl Bodnar, speaking exclusively to TVP World, praised the effort, saying it was truly saving lives, and recalled how Poland was among the first to help Ukrainians in 2022.
This initiative shows exactly that how Polish people have the attitude to Ukrainian people.
A message reiterated by Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski.
A true friend is known in times of need.
What's more, Ukraine's foreign minister thanks to Polish people and called on their diplomatic missions to launch initiatives similar to the one started in Poland.
This assistance is urgently needed. It will go toward purchasing equipment, electricity, power supplies, and all forms of energy directly for Ukrainians and the communities in need. A small piece of your warmth will save Ukrainian families and children.
The assistance comes at a time when support for Ukrainians in Poland is low. A December survey by the Center for Public Opinion Research found 46% of respondents oppose welcoming Ukrainian refugees, amid what officials describe as a hybrid campaign to drive a wedge between the two neighbors.
Russia continues its brutal war. It is not the first time that Russia has carried out sabotage or bribed foreign nationals, including Ukrainians, in an attempt to undermine our unity with Poland.
Despite these, Poles have shown they remain reliable supporters of Ukraine. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
Global leaders and major figures of the finance world are convening in Davos for the annual World Economic Forum. This year, all eyes will be on U.S. President Donald Trump, who will attend for the first time in 6 years amid the ongoing feud with Europe over Greenland, with Danish officials confirming they will not take part in the summit. We're now joined live by our correspondent Kazimierz Łysiak from Davos to bring us the latest. Good evening, Kazimierz. So, are Donald Trump and his threats towards Europe going to steal the show this year?
Good evening, Claudia. Well, it's difficult to imagine something else, really. I mean, this truly is an unprecedented situation. And here at the World Economic Forum in Davos, this will definitely be one of the main topics of discussions. You can truly sense that there is an atmosphere of anticipation here in Switzerland, waiting for the arrival of U.S. President Donald Trump. And he will be delivering a speech on Wednesday. This speech coming at a time of a major feud between Trump and Europe over Greenland, feud being so big that Danish officials actually decided to skip this event altogether. And let me remind you that the World Economic Forum here in Davos is one of the largest and most important events in the world in the sphere of politics and finance. There will be more than 60 world leaders coming here to discuss the most challenging things in the world right now, and well, this feud between Trump and Europe and the potential undermining of the very idea of NATO is definitely one such challenge. Now there will be also top European officials coming here, like French President Emmanuel Macron, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Polish President Karol Nawrocki, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. All of them will be discussing what to do next in the world where international order seems to be completely shifted.
And following that, do you think that there will be space for Ukraine in Davos this year?
Well, that's actually a good point. Definitely there will be space for Ukraine here. This event is huge. It will be lasting throughout the entire week. And there are reports that U.S. President Donald Trump will be meeting not only with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and his European allies here in Davos, but also with the diplomat from Russia, Karol who has been the diplomat in the previous talks between Ukraine, Russia and the United States. We will have to wait and see what the outcome of these talks could be. And also the United States is coming here with the biggest delegation ever, with not only U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, State Secretary Marco Rubio, but also Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, being here in attendance. So Trump is coming really with all of his top officials and advisors with him to hold really major discussions, not only about Europe and about Greenland, but also about Ukraine and other topics.
Thank you so much, Kazimierz. That was Kazimierz Łysiak reporting live from Davos. With a whirlwind of statements around the annexation of Greenland by the U.S. and a possible tariff war between the superpower and its European allies, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the program Ivana Stradner, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, who joins me to dig even deeper into the subject at hand. Ivana, thank you so much for joining me on World News tonight.
Always pleasure.
So, as we look at the whole scenario, what do you think this crisis, because we need to call it that at this point in time, is going to mean for the future of NATO? Is this a make it or break it situation? Are we finally arrived at this point?
I think it's too early to predict any doomsday scenario right now. What I agree with President Trump is that Greenland is very important for European security, for transatlantic security, for American security. However, the approach that President Trump is taking is not the wisest approach, because right now, with Russia and China trying to completely undermine the West and to completely rewrite the global order, the last thing that we need is to make our allies being upset at the United States. And that's precisely why I'm very concerned what's happening right now between Europe and the United States, but also about NATO writ large. And to zoom out, we were talking multiple times on your show how Russia has been trying to undermine NATO. And unfortunately, nowadays, NATO doesn't need external enemies if the enemies are already trying, to undermine it, but the allies inside the alliance are not united. And that's precisely what I see right now.
You mentioned that we shouldn't be jumping to conclusions. We shouldn't be focusing on doomsday scenarios, and I completely agree with you. But where is the point of no return in this whole scenario? I mean, by February 1st, if I'm correct, we're going to see tariffs reaching up to 10%. Then by June, there is a possibility of extension up to 25%. Where in this scenario are we going to see that there is no return?
President Trump has a long history of applying tariffs to boost American national security. And while, that's not, in my view, the right approach to approach with our allies, because make no mistake, Europe is going to retaliate. And that's already happening inside the EU, a lot of talks to impose additional countermeasures on the United States. And here is the thing. This really reminds me on how Russia is negotiating, because it reminds me very much on a lose-lose strategy, because neither the United States nor Europe are going to win. The only winners in this whole story will be Russia and China. And as I mentioned in the past, we have to really zoom out and to understand why President Trump is concerned about Greenland. And we have to put it in the context of the Arctic. Russia and China are already there boosting their national security efforts. We are talking about rare minerals. We are talking about the U.S. Military base. So I understand that part of the story. But what I do not understand is that Denmark has historically been our ally. And all President Trump has to do is to knock on a door there and to ask them for help. Because as the United States is increasingly focusing on China, we will need allies in Europe also to counter China, especially if President Trump is concerned about the Arctic. And earlier today, I already saw that Russia is talking about U.S.-Russia cooperation in the Arctic, which would be a very bad sign. So that's precisely why I'm not happy really with economic war, because this is going to cause a lot of economic troubles in Europe, but also disappointments in the United States. So this is not a win-win game. This is truly a lose-lose game.
About what you just said, I would like to dig in deeper. You mentioned that Russia reached out to the U.S. with a possibility of cooperation in the Arctic. Do you think that President Donald Trump, as a businessman at heart, would actually agree to this?
I truly hope, that basically what Russia said, they believe, that as a relationship, it's in Russian media, as the relationship is improving, that they believe that the start of their cooperation might actually start in the Arctic. And that's an old Russian game, talking that peace through trade. Let's forget about, wars. Let's talk about economic cooperation. We can be allies. And that's a very wrong approach. President Trump is the core negotiator, business negotiator. And that might work really with real estate. The problem is applying such a strategy in the context of Russia, it will not work, because just look at what's happening between Russia and the United States negotiations on Ukraine. Russia has been pushing that envoy in the United States, constantly talking about economic cooperation, because Americans love to talk about business, about improvement, about that, win-win game. And Russia knows that. So that's precisely why I'm very concerned that some fractures, in Washington might fall for that Arctic cooperation. That would be a strategically tragic mistake for the United States. As a matter of fact, I do believe that Russia and China are going to start a new, what I like to call a global power competition in the Arctic and in the space in the coming years. And that's precisely why right now the United States should not fall for that. The United States should be very concerned about the Arctic, and that's precisely why we need allies in Europe to help us with that.
I would also like to shed some light on a possible European response to those tariffs that we've covered here extensively on the show. We know that there is going to be an extraordinary meeting of EU leaders that will take place on Thursday, January 22nd. And as we read I would like to bring a quote from the Financial Times. George Saravelos, Deutsche Bank's chief FX strategist, said, quote, "Europe is America's largest lender. European countries own $8 trillion of U.S. bonds and equities, almost twice as much as the rest of the world combined. From our perspective, the key thing to watch over the next few days will be whether EU decides to activate its anti-coercion instrument by putting measures that impact capital markets on the table," end quote. Could the U.S. gamble such assets in a scenario that they impose the tariffs and the situation escalates?
That's exactly, why earlier today I told you that I'm very concerned about this trade war, because there are no winners there. There will only be losers. And right now I understand why Europe has that approach, because they have been trying constantly to talk nicely to Washington, D.C., but there were tariffs, even in the past on the horizon. And Europe is kind of like sick and tired of that approach, and they're trying to retaliate. So I understand that part. Why I'm a little bit, more hopeful probably than some other analysts, it's because still in the United States, there are a lot of people in the U.S. government, in Congress, who might not be happy with further escalation when it comes to economy, because that will destabilize both European and American markets. So that's precisely why I think it's a wise thing to wait and see.
So this tariff discussion, I know that we are starting to run out of time, but I need to ask you about the Board of Peace. I mean, we've seen some invitations. We allegedly heard of the invitations being sent out to Vladimir Putin, to Alexander Lukashenko. We've also heard about Polish President Karol Nawrocki and other Western leaders being invited to this Board of Peace. Do you think that Donald Trump will be able to reshape the world order as we know it? And how does it stand in contrast to this whole tariff war, to the dominance in the Arctic, to a possible conflict on that scope with Russia? How does it play together? What's your opinion?
I'm really not very hopeful about that Board of Peace. I understand, again, the logic. The logic is to build such a informal basic institution that will bring, countries to sit together and to try, to prevent further wars. But I understand also why he invited Putin, as he's currently negotiating with Russia. But that's not going to really work, because if we are talking about reshaping the global order in China and Russia has been trying to divide it, that's precisely why right now we need a unity between Europe and the United States to stand together when it comes to peace and security in the world. There are a lot of research so far that is talking about potential further escalation in Europe, whether in the Baltic states, coming from Russia, or China taking over Taiwan. And that's precisely why dividing even further our allies is not going to work. I'm quite certain that many European countries will reject such an invitation, which will basically put America only with allies in Europe, I don't know, such as probably Hungary and few other countries. And with all due respect, with friends such as Hungary, the United States doesn't need enemies, given that Hungary has been a close ally to both Russia but also China.
Ivana Stratner, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was my guest on the show. Ivana, pleasure as always to have you back.
Thank you very much for a kind invitation.
Thank you. And so this would be all for now. Thank you for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features in just a moment.